So I want to talk to you about testimony because I feel like, a lot of people have these profound, I guess they're profound experiences with a higher power, with something that's outside of ourselves. And when we do, that experience can have so many powerful things that can be reflected on within it. And if we hold those things in to ourselves, I don't know. I just don't feel like that's what we're supposed to do. Something tells me that the reason why, for a lot of people, that we have these profound experiences and these profound encounters with God is because God wants us then to share them with other people. And mine happened, you know, 16 years ago now when my grandmother died in 2009. And I've kept it to myself this entire time. And I've known in my spirit that that was wrong the entire time. But I kind of just thought that, eventually that that feeling of guilt and I don't know, just a few of the emotions that come with holding it in, that would just, eventually fade. But it hasn't. And I think it's because we're not supposed to hold it in. And so I think it's going to stick with you and continue to bother you until you make the decision to share it with other people, because ultimately that's why God shared it with you. And so today I want to tell you my testimony and talk to you about my experiences because I do feel like they were profound. And a big part of the reason why I held them in for so long is I think the reason why many of us do, because we worry about what people are going to think. And if people are going to believe you, people are going to think I'm crazy, am I cuckoo. But with age comes this ability to just not give a anymore. And it's a freeing feeling once you get there. And that's where I'm at because I just don't care anymore. And my main goal is to try and help as many people as I can because I'm making up for lost time here. And so I feel like by sharing my testimony, it has the potential to possibly help other people and to maybe even lead to their own encounter and a life changing experience that can happen for them as well. And that's why I think that we should all be sharing our testimonies. As crazy as they may sound, that's just all the more powerful it is. And we need to see that instead of seeing it through our human eyes. We need to see that through our spiritual eyes. That the reason why these things happen and they seem so profound is because they have the ability to do work in other people. And I think that that's part of why God gives us these testimonies and these experiences. And He relies on us to help change and influence other people. And maybe that's the problem why it looks like we have a complete godless society today, is because we've stopped sharing our testimonies, worrying about what people think about it all the time. Well, today I'm going to share mine with you. And I hope that it has the power to touch somebody out there. And I do fully believe that it does. So in 2009, my grandmother was very special to me. My upbringing was not a traditional one. I grew up without my real father. And so my very early childhood, because my mother was a young mother, she had me when she was a senior in high school. I believe she was even pregnant when she was 17. Because of that, I grew up in my grandparents' home, from newborn up to like 5 years old. And because of that, my mother tended to be my sister. My uncle tended to be my brother, and my gram was the one who really played the mother role, and my grandfather played the father role. But my grandfather ultimately passed away at a very young age, and I think I was either 4 or 5. And it was after that that my mom decided that she didn't want to raise me in my grandparents' home because she could tell that she was losing control of raising me to my grandmother, because my grandmother's uh, personality was very strong and she was very stubborn, and so she wanted to very much have control of the reins. And I think my mom just recognized that the only way she was ever going to be able to raise me on her own was to take me away from there. And so I moved off with my mom after my grandfather had died. My pup up at a pretty young age. Like I said, I think I was 5 years old, 4 or 5. And we moved up into upper state New York. And I moved around a lot. I remember I changed quite a few schools, and it was a little rocky, my upbringing, because my mom, although she didn't have a relationship with my real father after I was born, she did have another relationship, and it was with him that she left and chose to go off and try to start her own life. And him being my stepfather, we just never really connected very well. And I'm just going to leave it at that. And so it was pretty rough, growing up. And my grandmother, she would write me, type on her typewriter. I'd get letters in the mail from her, typed out from her typewriter back in the day. Sometimes they were handwritten, but a lot of times they were typed. And I always look forward to getting that mail from her, because I absolutely adored her. She was my mammy, and I loved her so much. Like I can't even do justice to try and get you to understand who she was in my life, because you get unconditional love from your mother, but your grandmother, it's even another level of it. I could do no wrong. Bratty could do no wrong. And I was the apple of her eye, she would always say. And she treated me like it. And, I just felt the love just radiating from her every time I was with her. And I tried to be with her as much as I could. I would come back and spend summers with her. And, eventually we moved back into Pennsylvania. And, when I was in middle school, and then we ultimately moved back to my hometown where she lived, when I went into high school. And, she was just always there. My stepfather worked away. He was always working on the road. So my grandmother would come to my house and basically stay there with my mom during the week to help her with everything. And just, so she was just very much a very big part of my life. And, that really didn't change with age either. I mean, I always maintained a very close, tight relationship with my grandmother. And then I got older and went out into the world and did a lot of foolish things and made a lot of mistakes, like many of us do, and lived a very ugly life. I don't know how else to say it, but nothing that I'm certainly not proud of, I can tell you that. Did a lot of bad things, made a lot of bad decisions, which ultimately always led me down the wrong path. But back in 2009, after I had already settled down, found a good woman and settled down with her early in my adulthood, and had a daughter with her, which really changed my whole trajectory in life. It settled me down. It got me grounded and, focused on the things that I should be focused on. I'm not going to say I was perfect even at that time, but I was definitely changed from who I was previous to that. Because now I had a child, and I certainly did not want to have her be fatherless like I was. I wanted to make sure, it was so important to me to make sure I was a part of her life. And so that's what I did. I settled down with my girlfriend at the time, and we were raising this child together, and everything was great, and we lived in my hometown. Eventually, we ultimately moved back to even my small hometown, and so we were all together again. And so my grandmother and everybody was a part of my daughter's life, and they were the good old days because they were soon about to change. Because in 2009, my grandmother was always, it seemed like she was always having health problems. There was always something with her. And the one thing I can say, though, is that she always loved Jesus. She loved God so much. It's all that she talked about. It's literally like it was her whole world. And to be honest, it wasn't mine. And I didn't like hearing about it, and I didn't like talking about it, and I have regretful things that I even said to her back then because I did not want to hear it. I wanted no part of it. None. I thought it was nonsense. But in 2009, she got really sick and ended up in the emergency room in Danville. And it was bad there for a while. There was a couple weeks where we weren't sure if she was going to make it. And I actually stayed in the hospital overnight and would leave there to go to work, and then I'd come back and get cleaned up there in their bathroom, and I tried to stay there as much as I could with her so she wasn't alone. And this went on for weeks, and we thought that she was getting better, but then it just always, something would happen and it would just go back downhill, and it was a very rocky time. And I'll never forget, we were there one evening, me, my mother, and my uncle. And like I said, because of my upbringing and the way that it was, I had a different kind of relationship with both of them. I mean, my mother was ultimately my mother, but it was kind of different though. And my uncle, like I said, he was like a brother. And so when we were there, my mom, my uncle, and myself with my gram, it was almost like her three children, me being the youngest, there to support her and to be there with her. And I remember we were all there and we were outside having a discussion, and we all went back in because she was just so negative at this time. Like she would say, like, I just want to die. I don't want to keep doing this. She was on a breathing machine, and just, but she was coherent, and these things were very difficult to hear, and we were always trying to encourage her, and it was almost like you just couldn't break through to her though. But after our discussion, I'll never forget, we went back into the hospital, and we went up to her room, and I walked in, and she was laying there with her breathing mask on, and I said, "Ma'am, do you want me to turn the TV on for you?" She just kind of shrugged, and I'm like, "I'm sure, maybe I can find the Christian station," because that's all she would watch, was those Christian televangelists that I don't like. Let's just make sure we're clear here, because there is even a lesson in that. But she always watched them at home. And I thought maybe it would help lift her spirit. So I said, "Ma'am, let me see if I can find your Christian channel that you watch." And I grabbed that little remote that was attached to the bed, and I turned on the TV, and within a click or two, boom, there it was. And not only did I find it immediately, and I mean there's hundreds of channels on that TV. I found it immediately. And not only did I find the channel immediately, but the preacher that was on there was her favorite preacher. And his name is Benny Hinn. Now, I don't want to get into that yet. I want to continue with the story, but I will come back to this. Benny Hinn was on. And so not only did I find a Christian station on the TV immediately, but it's her favorite pastor that's on there. So it was like, wow, that was pretty crazy. I mean, I remember we all looked at each other like, wow, but didn't think too much of it until I turned the volume up and started to hear him speak. And what he said, I could not believe. It blew me away. It blew all of us away. As soon as that volume was turned up where we could begin to hear this man's voice, what we heard him saying is, I am speaking to somebody who's laying in a hospital bed. That's having a hard time breathing. And I just want you to know you're going to be healed. I know you're suffering. I know you can't breathe. I know you're struggling to breathe, but you are going to be healed. And I remember looking at my mom and my uncle in disbelief, and then I looked at my gram and I seen where her whole demeanor changed. And at that point, something also changed in me. And I wasn't sure what it was at the time, but all of a sudden, the concern that I had for her life was no longer there. I thought for sure she was going to be healed just because of what had happened, because it was insane. I couldn't believe it. And I just couldn't chalk that up to coincidence. And I remember it lifted everybody's spirit in the room. And then at some point a little later on, we went back outside and we were talking about it. And I remember just saying to my mom and my uncle, like, I can't even believe that just happened. It was like, that's crazy. Like, what do you make of it? Like, I think that there's something to it. And I think she's going to be healed. And so from that point forward, I had this faith. Even though I was furthest from God, I had this faith that became part of me that was unbreakable. And as the days went on, there were some ups and downs there, but I had this full belief, refused to believe that anything was going to happen except her coming home out of that hospital and being healed. But then a few days later, as I was in the room with her, we all were, things took a turn. And I'll never forget it. I was sitting by her bedside holding her hand, and I was drawing pictures for her because I'm an artist. I've always been into art, and I was just like doodling on some paper and sitting next to her holding her hand. And the doctors came in and the nursing staff, whoever they were, came in and said that they needed to do this procedure and they needed to put an IV in her arm, but it was a tricky procedure because it wasn't in the veins, but it was something that needed to go into an artery. And so it was a difficult thing. And they stressed it to us that, this is difficult and, but we didn't really think much of it until the whole thing began to unfold, because it was within seconds of them doing that all of a sudden all the machines in the room started to go haywire and everybody just panicked that was there working on her. And all of a sudden alarms are going off and all these medical personnel are flooding into the room. And we're just like, what's going on? Like, we don't even know what's happening, but clearly something is wrong here. And they made us get out of the room and go into this other room. And I remember being in that room and everybody was in full panic mode except for me. My mom was panicking. My uncle was panicking. And I'm just sitting there saying, nope, there's no way. There's no way. she's gonna come out of it. Like, this isn't it. There's no way it can be it, because, like I said, at this time I had this unbreakable faith. I don't even know where it came from, but I had it, and I refused to believe that anything other than her being healed that day was going to be the result of what was going on there. Until the doctor walked in and told us what had happened. And basically that she had went into cardiac arrest when they tried to do this procedure on her. I'm not sure what triggered the whole thing to happen. We never did get a good explanation on that, but ultimately that led into CPR and defibrillation and all these things that were going on. And they told us, they're like, look, she's done. Her ribs are broke from trying to do CPR on her, and it's like not good. She's not going to make it, and we need to make a decision here about, taking her off the life support, because at that point she's now on this life support machine. And I remember walking out in the hallway and laying down on the ground, and I just couldn't accept it. I could not accept it. And even after it was done and it was over, it was almost like I just kept waiting for somebody to walk in the room and tell us that something happened and it's a miracle and she's back. But that never happened. And so now I had to deal with this whole thing. What do I do with this? Because I felt something that I had never felt before. This unbreakable faith. And it was shattered. And so I wrestled with that thought for a long time. Days went by and I just wrestled with it constantly. And ultimately, we had to leave that hospital that day and take things home with us that were hers. And it was just unbelievable. I couldn't even believe that she was gone. And as the days went on, arrangements obviously have to be made and all these things have to take place. And you get caught up in all the busyness of all of that. And we had to go to her place that she was living in at the time and go through her stuff. And I remember on my way there, I was struggling bad at this time. And I'll never forget, on my way to her house that day, I was wrestling with God. And I remember specifically saying in my truck on my way there, I need you to show me something here. I need a sign that what I felt is real and that you're trying to show me something here and that she is okay and that she was healed, just not in the way that I thought. And that I needed a sign. I needed something because I'm literally hanging from a string at this point. And I got to my grams and I pulled in and I walked in the house and it was gloomy and full of grief and just terrible feeling. And as we began going through her things, it just became even more difficult. But we were talking about what everybody wanted to take. What did you want? What did you want, Brad? And I said, I want her Bible. It's all I cared about. I wanted her Bible. And I grabbed that thing and I opened it up. And on the blank page at the beginning of that Bible, there was a letter written to me by her a long time ago when I was just a little boy. And it said, a lot of things, but it just ultimately said, I just pray that someday Brad will find God. And I couldn't believe what I was reading. It was unbelievable. I remember when I flipped to that page and saw it, something happened. God gave me that sign. And so the wrestling continued for sure for a long time. But I went from somebody who despised Christianity to somebody who is now trying to consider it and figure these things out because I needed to know what the purpose was now, because now I'm faced with this question of what is life? What's this all about? Why do we grow up and have these people in our lives that we love and then they die and we lose them? And what is all this? And so that journey began at that moment, and it went on for years. And because of the way that I viewed Christianity, I could not bring myself to go there first, even though it was clear to me at the time. I began looking everywhere else. Different philosophies, Eastern religions, all kinds of things. Like I said, this went on for years. I'm trying to find the truth of this matter. And everywhere I looked seemed to be a dead end. And all these other philosophies and all these other Eastern religions, Hinduism and Buddhism, and, I even read the Urantria book, and like all these things. I spent years going down all these different paths, all of them leading me nowhere. And then finally I just said, you know what? I'm going to turn to this Bible. I put it off. I fought against it. But ultimately, that was the end for me. And so as I began to look in it with an open heart and ready to receive whatever truth was ahead of me, because I didn't care about anything else at that time, I just wanted to know what the meaning to this life was. That's it. And if that shatters my paradigm and shatters my worldview, then so be it. But I want to know what the truth is. And as soon as I began to dig into that Bible, it began. And everybody tried to tell me, Brad, you should just start in the New Testament. Just start at Matthew. Start in the New Testament. And I would say, what book do you start from the middle? What other book do you grab and start reading it in the middle? I'm not after that. I'm after the truth here. So I started in the beginning. And that was the beginning of a long journey through many rabbit holes. And I don't want to this is already getting almost to 30 minutes, so I don't want to have you here too much longer. I will talk about these things more, but that's where my journey began. And as I grew in that, and as I went down that path, seeking truth and trying to lean into God to show me and to reveal these things to me, I believe He did slowly start to open these things up to me. And ultimately, it led me to where I am here today. Because back then, when I came into all this different truth, I wanted to shout it from the mountaintops, but I kept my mouth shut. I thought about doing this back then, and I didn't. And I have major regrets about it. But that's been 16 years ago, 17 years now. I don't even know, but it's been a long time. And I've decided to stop resisting that and to do it now. And so I encourage you, likewise, that if you have been on a journey like this and you have experienced things like this, to share it. Because I do think that that's the purpose of these testimonies, is because they have the power to potentially help somebody else. to ultimately find God. And we all need that today. Just look around. There's one more thing I will say about this before I let you go, because it's the most profound part of this. And it's the one thing I've been reluctant to ever talk about openly like this. I've only ever told a few of the closest people to me about it. But I'm ready to say it now because, like I said, I just don't care. As I was on that journey and began looking into my Bible and began also listening to other people, I'll never forget I was listening to a church sermon that morning. And for the first time in my life, I felt this guilt over my history that I had never felt before. I was absolutely disgusted and humiliated with myself and my behavior leading up to that point. And I felt so remorseful for all the things that I had done. I mean, it just hit me like a ton of bricks, and I was just disgusted with myself. And I will never forget this, and I promise you it is the absolute truth. After that service that morning, and after going through those emotions of regret and remorse and just repentance for everything that I had done up to that point and who I was, I went up and I got in the shower. And as I was showering, I'm looking down, and the water that is coming off of me was dirty. And I mean dirty, like mud dirty. I look up at this because I can't even believe what I'm seeing. Like at first it was like startling. And I look up at the spigot to see if like dirty water's coming out of my spigot, and it's not. It's coming out perfectly crystal clear, crystal clean. And it's hitting my body. And as it's falling off my body, it is dirt water. And I mean dirt water. The whole base of the tub was full of this dirty water like mud. And I'm looking up at the spigot, like I can't even believe. I'm looking at the shower head, trying to rationalize what I'm seeing, and all of a sudden it hit me that my sins were being washed away. And I promise you that that happened. I would never lie about something like this or anything at this point. Definitely not this. It was unbelievable. And it was in that moment that I knew I was in the right place and I was on the right path. And so, if you are on a similar journey, I encourage you to stay on it. Seek God. And I promise you, if you do that with a fully open heart, you will find Him. One other thing before I forget. I mentioned Benny Hinn. Let me say something here. I don't have too many good things to say about that man or most preachers like him. But what I realize now came to me before I even knew any of this Bible stuff. And it is that God will use all things, even evil things, even bad things, negative things. He will use them all for His glory. And that's why He ultimately brought me to Him through a man that I despised, and clearly showed me later in my journey that this man is corrupt and evil. But even through him, I can be glorified. And so there was a powerful lesson even in that. So, anyway, that's heavy enough. That's enough for this one. Hopefully, it has touched you. I am Brad Casper. This is Casper's Corner. Please like the video if it's touched you, share it if you feel led, and subscribe for more. See you in the next one.